Hello, everyone. I hope you're making the best of your circumstances today. And welcome to Homemakers Radio. I'm broadcasting from this little tiny sewing room in the manse, and I don't get to come in here very often. But if you're new here, please click the link in the description and go to the place on which this video will be posted so that you can see the pictures that go with it and maybe a summarization of what I have spoken of today. And also, I am wearing a necklace that was made for me by Roxy from the blog Living from Glory to Glory. If you'd like to go over there and offer her a prayer or some encouragement, she has some medical problems and she's been sick. And who could live without Roxy? She's so encouraging, and she has been to my house, I have been to her house, and we talk to each other sometimes. So I would just like to ask you to do me a favor and do that for me today. It's a good day today because you are here. We woke up and we're alive, even though we're getting more vital every day. You know what that means, don't you? And these are some of the things that we need to be so thankful for, and quit looking out at that big world out there and what it's doing and what we think it's going to do for us, because it really can't. And many people have told me that they have been through so much training and education and career, building up their career, and it all came to nothing. Just like in Pride and Prejudice, you told me that they would come and contact my daughters, and it all came to nothing. Well, anyway, what you do and your daily life at home is really what matters. It's the little things, isn't it? So it's a good day because we're awake and we're here, and I'd like to encourage you and give you something pleasant to listen today. I hope I don't report on too many things that are unpleasant, and may I encourage you that at the slightest sense of unease, to get up out of your chair and take a turn around the room. Walk around the house. You know, in the past, this walking around the house, when it could have benefited people, even the children, they were told, why don't you go somewhere and sit down and be still? That's very, very bad for you. Don't go somewhere and sit down and be still. Get up every now and then, every hour, get up. Walk around, because it balances the brain. It seems to give a sense of a creative spirit in you. And I mean, not everybody's the same. I understand that. And maybe it wouldn't benefit you. But throughout the house, I think that we can get what they call houseitis, or kind of a house, stuffy house syndrome. It's really important to get up. That helps, to walk around. Also, open the door and step outside for a second. Just a second every hour. You'll find that it is like Miss Bingley said to Elizabeth. May I encourage you to take another turn around the room. It's so refreshing. So I'd like to encourage you to do that. Now, on my list today, besides getting ready, and I always like to emphasize getting ready, even though you're probably very bored with me saying that. Some of you already know how to do that. You don't need for me to tell you. But before you go to get ready or to do some work, I want to share my teacup with you. You've seen this before. I'm just recycling all these cups. This kind of goes with the decor in the room and my top that I'm wearing. And I would like to also tell you about the value of having a list. I finally got everything in a little tiny notebook that fits in my apron pocket and that has a color on it so that I won't lose it. And I have started to put everything in this notebook, and it's a mess, but at least it's all in one place and not on little pieces of paper everywhere. So on my list today, besides, the kitchen, the laundry room, the bathroom, those things that I'm real sensitive about keeping sanitary, I wrote down that I wanted to paint a picture of something. So I don't care what it is, if it's a sheep or a cow or a flower, and I've always wanted to learn to paint sheep because they are so hard for me. So I want to get the best of that and learn that. So maybe I will get around to that today. And also, I'd like to write a very very short story, maybe on one page, just one piece of paper, one page, to maybe send to one of my descendants, or just keep it. Just write one short story, even if it does not have a big drama in it. And I'll be talking to you today about stories because of some of the subject matter that I'm going to be covering. I would also like to encourage you, get your hair fixed up, bathe, get dressed. You know, bathing is the beginning of the new day because it signifies the start to something. And that's why I'd like to encourage you to do that and get your hair fixed. Do the best you can. A lot of us don't think that we are um, extremely beautiful, but that doesn't matter because we're at home. God loves us, and the proof of it is He allows us to be here and cares about us. And so, have an inspiration, have 5 minutes of inspiration where you make a goal, even if it's a crazy goal, a dream. Keep some dreams in your heart that you may never follow. A lot of people won't do that. They will not. Homemakers, especially, they want reality only, and they will not suggest to themselves anything that they'd like to do or see or places they'd like to go because it might not ever happen. But you know, Jane Austen herself didn't go very many places, and so the reason I'll tell you later on why I use old stories and books in my broadcasts here. But first, let's make sure your appearance is taken care of and get yourself something to put a list in. Just put a list in the things that really would make you happy to have done in the home today that are simple and that don't take an enormous amount of time. And also, if you could possibly get on the web and find a 5-minute easy beginner's stretch. That's all you need to do. If you are someone who's more chair bound, you can find people doing that. Just 5 minutes or less. You don't even have to do the full 5 minutes. A lot of times people will get on one of these exercises and say, oh, I couldn't do that. But they don't realize that even the instructors give permission to go at your own pace and skip a couple or just do one. And sometimes in my ladies' Bible class, I tell them, why don't we just spend the first few minutes, rolling our shoulders and stretching? And I'm not really a physical therapist, and I don't like to instruct exercise, but just some little thing. It doesn't have to be. And when my descendants are here, the children like to exercise, and we'll just do one of everything. We won't do 10, vigorous jumping exercises, and just do one of each one because it limbers you up a little bit, and it's also so good for your mind, and it's free. Now, I also learned, so I put down that I wanted to paint something, and it's probably going to be a sheep if I can do that. It'd be a silly looking sheep, won't it? And then I also wanted to learn something. So one of my kids called me and told me something, and I've heard it before from several friends. It must be a saying that's going around, and it goes along with some of the stories and books that I have been talking about on these videos, and that is, pride gets in the way of the way out. Isn't that interesting? I had to ponder on that one a long time and try to dream up some scenarios or recall some things in which pride could get in the way because we want to do the right thing, but we don't want to admit that we went the wrong way. And so now let's get into the home life and the home living and the house and the family. And that is that an organized home, it doesn't have to be extremely organized, but at least have things that are always going to go in a certain place, and to tell you that the family is reassured, the people who dwell there with you are reassured and can rest easy if they know what will come next and if they know where something is. I know sometimes we like to rearrange things, but if they always know where something is that they are going to need and they depend on, that's very stabilizing for them. So that's one reason to to learn to clean house. And well, I know a lot of people don't care to decorate, and that's fine. But even cleaning house is a type of decor because you're just making it polished and shiny. Now, one of the things that I benefited the most from being a veteran homeschooler is that it's so different than the way that we were all educated in the world. For one thing, if we learned something in school, you'd learn it one time and then you'd leave it, probably never refer to it again. You memorize something but never use it. Now, with homeschooling, I got to thinking today what some of the benefits were to me because I had the children and I wanted to homeschool them. And it is such that something is learned and then repeated and then built up on as you go, and so that all your life you have created a foundation with things that grow from it. And I'll just give you one example. Perhaps you could think of something else, and that is, and also there's nothing else to see. Well, I have one more show and tell, but for now you can get going on your work while you listen. And that is, let's suggest that you're teaching the alphabet. Now, teaching someone to read is not rocket science. There are 26 letters of the alphabet with 44 sounds. So that's all you have to do is make yourself some little cards that give all these sounds. You can also look up what those 44 sounds are. Put them on, they're SH, CH, TH, things like that. And the combinations of these letters create words that you can actually sound out because the words are sounds. So one of the benefits that I learned was the alphabet. So let's say you're teaching the alphabet, and some of you that are grandmothers now or great-grandmothers or don't have children at home need to know this because it gives more meaning to something like learning the alphabet. So in homeschool, when we learn the alphabet, we're going to build on that. And here's how you do it. It's not, you have to learn the history of the alphabet plus why God wants us to read or write. In fact, one of the challenges that I'm going to have for one of my ladies' Bible classes is we're going to look up the scriptures where God either wrote or told someone else to write, or where someone in the Bible was commanded to read something. So we're going to dash to pieces that awful rumor that people in the old days couldn't read or write. Because I'm telling you they could, and even if they couldn't, they would quickly invent a way to do it. And that God spoke through writing and spoke to us, and He wants us to teach through reading and writing. So that's why it's so important. And that's one reason why reading and writing has been sabotaged in some of the government schools, because it makes some people handicapped in that area because it's not properly taught. And so let's start with the alphabet. And my mother-in-law, she kept in her purse a piece of paper that had the alphabet listed on it with a Bible verse that began with each letter. Like A was abstain from all appearance of evil, and B was be kind one to another. And so she had all these in the alphabet just in case she was called on to teach someone or to take someone aside and give them just a basic Bible understanding, probably children, if that was possible. And she had other things in her purse that were just emergency teaching supplies, and it was just simple little things like that. She did the same thing with numbers. And so with the alphabet, you can also go to the Psalms, where in a couple of places there were the alphabet was shown as the beginning of a poem or a thought, and that was how the children learned the alphabet, was with they're being taught God's word at the same time. The other thing is that as you grow older, the alphabet becomes really important because words are important, and it's important how we speak and how we pronounce, and it's important also to be courteous while we talk. And also, like I spoke of in the last video, I talked about monograms. One of the things that we liked in the olden days was just such a privilege, to have your own home and to have a monogram on your towel. Well, I don't think people value that as much, although it might be coming back commercially that you can have things monogrammed. But it was important to us because it helps make us feel established in our houses and in our homes and with our family. And the children grew up with these monograms that they saw on the pillowcases, that they saw on the towels, that they saw on the edge of the silverware, and it created a strong sense of belonging. Whereas today, you go to a big box store, you pick up your silverware, you pick up your sheets and towels and stuff. It has no more meaning than the family next door. And so kids, sometimes do not have a strong sense of established belonging to a certain family. And I know that this is all part of a plan to dilute us all and make us feel like we're just part of the human race, but not anything more special than that. So with the alphabet, that's very, very important to understand that when you're homeschooling, you're going to be building on that alphabet, and you're going to repeat it, and it has more meaning than just learning it and leaving it the way they would do in ordinary education. Now, you might find other examples of how you'd learn something small in homeschooling, but go back and refer to it. Now, we also used to go ahead and write the times tables in the back of the math book so they could flip back and learn the times tables, see the times tables, get their answer quickly while they're trying to figure out a problem so that they don't have to memorize it. And eventually, they don't even have to flip back because they memorize it just by using it over and over. So they don't have to go through those tedious memory things. Now, another thing, too, that we liked was using books like Jane Austen as the kids got older, because you'd want to know what years that she lived so that you could understand what she was referring to and what places they lived and maybe what their houses were like or their clothing were like, and some of their expressions would relate to the era that they lived in. And so we build on all these things while we're homeschooling so that we can have a well-rounded life at home. And so much of Jane Austen was about the home. And you probably wonder why I use these old books, because when I'm broadcasting, and I did read a scathing article about me online one time about how she just uses the literature. She just uses old literature. Because, first of all, why do people use literature when they talk or speak, or why do they refer to the Bible, or why do they? First of all, it's copyright free. You're not going to get sued for talking about Emma, or someone, who wrote Emma isn't going to get upset because that was their novel, because now it's ours. And second of all, it helps that you don't have to dig up some memory of the past of someone who was speaking out of turn or rude. If you're trying to explain that, and you don't have to feel like people don't have to feel like you're talking about them, because you're just using these examples that make you realize that nothing has changed. That we all have the same obstacles and the same challenges as people in the past, and that's why we need God's word to tell us how to live and how to act. And there's a scripture that says, be courteous one to another. We need that because we'll have to be reminded. The previous generation had all the problems that they had to learn, so they had to learn to be courteous. But that doesn't mean that we automatically know, because our experience will necessitate that we learn that also. No matter how advanced people think they are, they're still going to have marriage problems, children's problems, money problems, home problems, emotional problems. It's all going to be, each generation has to learn. And one thing that we have to learn, so now if you can, make your list, get yourself a little note, make a list of all the things that you'd like to do to make life at home more pleasant, including the not just the making the house more comfortable, but including the warmth that you have for one another at home. Also, we need to learn to give others a chance to grow. So as I go into the stories that I want to relate today, um, you cannot peg anybody as a certain type of person. You have to give them a chance to learn and grow, because I always used to get irritated. There used to be this book back in the olden days, and it was by Tim and Beverly LaHaye. I've forgotten what the name of it was, but it was on marriage. And they had used these Greek philosophers' terms to describe personalities. And so then they had pegged people with these certain personalities that weren't even, I didn't think they were accurate, because a person could be that way. They could be a quiet person for a while, but maybe grow more confident later on and become a different personality. And they had them all pegged into these 4 personalities, and I always was offended by it, because I didn't see it anywhere that way in the Bible. And God gives people a chance to change, doesn't He? And He gives them a chance to grow. Which will bring me to Emma, because she was always talking about how she just wanted people to help people to grow, and she became quite irritating. But today I want to read a little bit about Emma, because when we get to the people part, I talked last time about how rudeness in conversation can cause a breakdown in family relationships too. Rudeness is, I've heard that bad manners creates more strife than anything else, especially bad manners in conversation. And the root of it is thoughtlessness, selfishness, and it's at the center of all unpleasantness is bad manners. And even down to the problem of people keeping themselves clean, having fresh breath, things like that that offend other people, and that is all. The root of it is not being aware, being self-centered, and not being thoughtful of other people. Now, some people like to make a controversy out of everything. I talked about that in the previous video, and so they wanted to get to Emma because she had conversations all through that book. She had a conversation with Miss Bates, with Mr. Elton and Mrs. Elton, with Frank, and with Mrs. Weston, and I'm trying to think, there was one other with Mr. Knightley, with Harriet. Just conversations galore in that story. And she had an agenda, her own agenda. She had not been thinking about marriage, family, and home for herself, but for everyone else. And so I'd like to caution you, if you are young and at home, and you're still at home and you're not married and you're with your family still, to not get into this, because what it is it was a type of ministry, and girls especially want to be in ministry, and they're going to help other people live. They're going to help other people have a good life, but they need to be, and they're told, not to be self-centered and think about others. But this is a way of thinking about others, is to think about your future family and how you might improve yourself, so that you might be someone who would be capable of loving children and loving their husbands. And so, if at all possible, remember, when I read this to you, her conversations with people, most of these people were astonished at what she said, because she really needed to be thinking about her own life. In fact, didn't Harriet say, I sometimes wonder about you, what about you getting married? And she said, oh no, I'm not interested. And so she was busy trying to arrange other people's lives. And so all these conversations showed people being rather crestfallen, because she was quite outspoken about it. And these are some of the problems we have with people today, is trying to run other people's lives or make people think the way that they want them to think. So the one person that I think that was able to really get through to her about what she was doing, kind of manipulating other people's lives, or being too interested in who they married and what they were doing, was Mr. Knightley, and it's possibly because he had watched her grow up and he had grown to love her, and so he knew there was something good in her. And this is one of the things I like about these stories. The Jane Austen and some of these other people like Elizabeth Gaskell created characters that had terrible flaws, but in the end, you could forgive them and you could love them. And that's the way we all are, isn't it? So in the home, I think it's really important, and I did explain to you why I am reading uh, from Emma, and that is that it has actual conversations that you've probably heard that are similar, and also has characteristics of people that just never change that you've heard, and won't get in trouble for talking about anyone. So, this is chapter 8. It didn't have a title. Some of these didn't have titles. I actually don't have a copy of the Jane Austen books, and have had bad experience ordering some of them that are printed off of Google Books or Gutenberg, and sometimes they go through the printing presses rather rapidly and come out with real wide margins, nothing in it, and then the writing is in between the pages. So I've given up on it. I'm just reading it off of my phone here. So if you need to get something done, go ahead and get started in that, and I will start with this chapter 8 of Emma by Jane Austen. Harriet slept at Hartfield that night. For some weeks past she had been spending more than half her time there, and gradually Hartfield was where Emma lived, and gradually getting to have a bedroom appropriated to herself, and Emma judged it best in every respect, safest and kindest, to keep her with them as much as possible just at present. Mr. Knightley called and sat some time with Mr. Woodhouse and Emma, till Mr. Woodhouse, who had previously made up his mind to walk out, was persuaded by his daughter not to defer it. Now, since I have been reading so much of Brian Kozlowski's The Jane Austen Diet, and he had very, very large chapters on going outside in the free air, I'm starting to appreciate a statement like this so much better. It has so much depth in it now that I understand their propensity to go outside. And you wouldn't consider a day fully lived unless you had been outside or gone for a walk. So he had previously made up his mind to walk out, and Mr. Woodhouse dropped by, and Harriet was out. He was persuaded by his daughter not to defer it, and was induced by the entreaties of both, though against the scruples of his own civility, to leave Mr. Knightley for that purpose. Mr. Knightley, who had nothing of ceremony about him, was offering by his short, decided answers an amusing contrast to the protracted apologies and civil hesitations of the other. Now, in the movies that they make on Emma, Mr. Knightley does not seem it says here, he had nothing of ceremony about him. He seemed more formal and ceremonious than he actually was in the book. Well, I believe, if you will excuse me, Mr. Knightley, if you will not consider me as doing a very rude thing, I shall take Emma's advice and go out for a quarter of an hour. As the sun is out, I believe I had better take my 3 turns while I can. Well, a turn was just a length, a distance, taking a turn around the room. I treat you without ceremony, Mr. Knightley. We invalids think we are privileged people. My dear sir, do not make a stranger of me, said Mr. Knightley. I leave an excellent substitute in my daughter Emma. She will be happy to entertain you, and therefore I think I will beg your excuse and take my 3 turns my winter walk. You cannot do better, sir. I would ask for the pleasure of your company, Mr. Knightley, but I am a very slow walker, and my own pace would be tedious to you. And besides, you have another long walk before you to Donwell Abbey. Well, I've had that experience. I have deliberately slowed myself down and become a slow walker, and no one wants to walk with me. Mr. Woodhouse at last was off. Thank you, sir, thank you, sir. I'm going this moment myself, and I think the sooner you go, the better. I will fetch your greatcoat and open the garden door for you. Mr. Woodhouse at last was off, but Mr. Knightley, instead of being immediately off likewise, sat down again, seeming inclined for more of a chat. He began speaking of Harriet, and speaking of her with more voluntary praise than Emma had ever heard before. This is where Emma starts to assert herself and give a very strong opinion, and Mr. Knightley starts to object. And as I said, he was the only character in the whole book that could bring her to repentance, to bring her to tears, because of the way she treated other people, and it's possibly that he could do that because he loved her enough to do it. I cannot rate her beauty as you do, said he, but she is a pretty little creature, and I am inclined to think very well of her disposition. Her character depends upon those she is with, but in good hands she will turn out to be a valuable woman. Now, I enjoyed that statement there because, yes, whoever we are with often influences us. Some people bring out the absolute best in us, and we're influenced by their character. Our character grows better because of them, but then get around somebody that's not so refined, and it could, cause us to be a little bit too relaxed in our manners and character and our speech. I've seen that. I'm glad you think so, and the good hands, I hope, may not be wanting. Now, wanting means scarce, the word want doesn't mean the same thing as it does today, and you've seen that in the Bible too. Someone will have no want, they'll have no need of anything, or no scarcity. Come, said he, you are anxious for a compliment, so I will tell you that you have improved her. You have cured her of her schoolgirl giggle, and that really does you credit. Yes, I learned recently that tittering, not twittering, tittering meant a nervous laugh. I have seen that and wondered what it is, where sometimes because someone is uneasy, we'll just laugh, a very shallow type laugh. It's not a real laugh at humor. It's not a belly laugh. And now I understand that's what that is. And he called it schoolgirl giggling, and it is called tittering. I believe it is also referred to in the New Testament somewhere. You are expecting her again, you say, this morning? Almost any moment she has been gone longer already than she intended. Something has happened to delay her, some visitors perhaps. Highbury gossips, tiresome wretches. Harriet may not consider everybody tiresome as you would, Emma. Emma knew this was true, and therefore said nothing. He presently added with a smile, I do not pretend to fix on times or places, but I must tell you that I have good reason to believe your little friend will soon hear of something to her advantage. Indeed? How so? Of what sort? A very serious sort, I assure you, said Mr. Knightley, still smiling. Very serious? I can't think of anything but one thing. Who is in love with her? Who makes you their confidant? Emma was more than half in hopes of Mr. Elton's having dropped a hint. Mr. Knightley was a sort of general friend and adviser, and she knew Mr. Elton looked up to him. I have reason to think, he replied, that Harriet Smith will soon have an offer of marriage, and from a most unexceptionable quarter. Robert Martin is the man. Her visit to Abbey Mill this summer seems to have done his business. He is desperately in love and means to marry her. He's very obliging, said Emma, but is he sure that Harriet means to marry him? Well, here she is. Instead of being happy at this news, starts to discourage Mr. Knightley because she has a different agenda. And In this story, it's good to take note of it. That's why I like to read a historical type book, because there's a character in there that's fictional, but it also can apply to anyone today. And often, uh, this is one of the things that I think is really integral for homeschool children, is to read the old books, at least see the movies first to see what they're about and how to read them and identify the characters, and then go read the books, because it helps them understand characters and characteristics and character qualities in people, and what things to avoid. Um, One of the things that Jane wanted people to do is dislike Emma, because she was such an irritating character, and she was always in everybody's business, and she had her own plans that she wanted other people to follow. We have those people today, but it's important to read about them, because then we understand and can avoid the same characteristics. Nobody wants to be like Emma, although I'm afraid a lot of us like her better than Jane wanted us to. But there are characters in, for example, the Dickens novels that I don't care for Dickens, but he was really good at some characters, and I'm thinking when I'm reading them, I was reading more of Our Mutual Friend lately, and noticing that one of the problems in throughout all the characters he wove into these stories was ungratefulness. And there was one couple, he had them in couples and pairs of people, and there was one couple there that was not ungrateful, and my one of my descendants brought that out to me, and I started to read it again and see it in there. So these are valuable for that reason. Also, the Old Testament is full of characters. All the there's the rebellious ones, there's the young ones, there's the troublemakers, there's the ones that are virtuous. They're all in there. Well means to make her an offer then. Will that do? He came to the Abbey 2 evenings ago on purpose to consult me about it. He knows I have a thorough regard for him and all his family, and, I believe, considers me as one of his best friends. He came to ask me whether I thought it would be imprudent for him to settle so early, whether I thought her too young, in short, whether I approved his choice altogether, having some apprehension perhaps of her being considered, especially since you are making so much of her, as in a line of society above him. I was very much pleased with all that he had said. I never hear better sense from anyone than Robert Martin. He always speaks to the purpose, open, straightforward, and very well judging. He told me everything, his circumstances and plans, and what they all proposed doing in the event of his marriage. He is an excellent young man, both as son and brother. Wouldn't that be lovely to have one of your sons, or you, if you're a young person listening, to have someone say that you were an excellent son and brother? This is so important, because your brother is going to be toasting you at your wedding and making a speech about you. So start being an excellent brother and son. And we're going back to a time when it's the parents that are going to recommend their sons and their daughters to anyone who needs help, or as a reliable person for anything. And I know some homeschool children that are grown now, but they spent their youth sitting with the elderly, or sitting with people who were shut-ins, or helping people that needed things fixed. And their sons learned how to help fix maybe a door that wasn't closing properly. Just little things. We call them punch jobs. And they're highly recommended. And so we need to be highly recommended for our character. So he said, he's an excellent young man, both as a son and a brother. You know, we live in an era where we want references from the jobs we previously had, and we depend on these references to get new jobs. But let's be content with references that say, he is an excellent young man, both as a son and a brother. I had no hesitation in advising him to marry. He proved to me that he could afford it. and that being the case, I was convinced he could not do better. I praised the fair lady too, and altogether sent him away very happy. If he had never esteemed my opinion before, he would have thought highly of me then, and, I dare say, left the house thinking me the best friend and counsellor he had ever had. That happened the night before last. Now, as we may fairly suppose, he would not allow much time to pass before he spoke to the lady, and as he does not appear to have spoken yesterday, it is not unlikely that he should be at Mrs. Goddard's today, and she may be detained by a visitor without thinking him at all tiresome. Now, that's where she is right now during this conversation. She's gone back to her caregiver, Mr. Goddard, and Emma does not realize that this was the plan, that Robert Martin would be there to propose to her. So Emma, she's very conceited, and she says, "Pray, Mr. Knightley, how do you know that Mr. Martin did not speak yesterday to her?" "Certainly," he replied, "I do not absolutely know it, but it may be inferred. Was not she the whole day with you?" "Come," she said, "I will tell you something in return for what you have told me. He did speak yesterday. That is, he wrote, and was refused." This was obliged to be repeated before it could be believed, and Mr. Knightley actually looked red with surprise and displeasure, as he stood up in tall indignation and said, "Then she is a greater simpleton than I ever believed her. What is the foolish girl about?" "Oh, to be sure," cried Emma. "It is always incomprehensible to a man that a woman should ever refuse an offer of marriage." "Nonsense! A man does not imagine any such thing," said Mr. Knightley. "But what is the meaning of this? Harriet Smith refused Robert Martin? I hope you are mistaken." "I saw her answer." Nothing could be clearer. "You saw her answer. You wrote her answer, too, Emma. This is your doing. You persuaded her to refuse him." "If I did, I should not feel that I had done wrong. Mr. Martin is a very respectable young man, but I cannot admit him to be Harriet's equal, and I am rather surprised indeed that he should have ventured to address her. By your account, he does seem to have had some scruples. It is a pity they were ever got over." "Not Harriet's equal!" exclaimed Mr. Knightley loudly and warmly, and with calmer asperity added a few moments afterwards, "No, he's not her equal, but he is much more her superior in sense and situation." And so he goes on and on to explain to Harriet why this is a good idea, and he eventually grows impatient with her. And I'm trying to kind of scroll up to see where he finally says, "Upon my word, Emma, to hear you abusing the reason you have is almost enough to make me think so too. Better without sense than misapply it as you do." So he was very cross when he was finished with this. They had quite a long conversation, and he was very cross with her, and it made her think. And a couple of times in the stories, he shamed her, and there was one time when I think she actually wept. Now, today I also want to share with you how important it is that you have, I mentioned before about having your own dreams, even if you can't have any path to them or anything, like to think about something that you might want to do should you be left. Your children grow up, they get married, they have children of their own, maybe they don't live nearby. We want them to, they don't always do that, but you're going to have some ambition of what you want to do with the house and with yourself. For example, when mine had to move away because of a job, the rooms were empty during the winter, so I started going around and stealth sleeping in them just to test the beds out, test the mattresses out. And so I revamped all that, got new stuff, and then I started to look at the rooms to think, what other thing could this room lend itself to? What other use could it be? so that I would turn one into a sewing room and one into an office and one into an exercise room. Of course, I pick up all that equipment and put it away when someone comes. But I got to thinking about the pioneer women. Now, every country, Western countries, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, um, the Americas, and Canada, and Alaska, all had a pioneer era. And indeed, maybe other places that we don't have a written history of. And so I have this book, and I got it because I liked the picture on it. And it's one of these historical, it's a collection of, I believe, 9 stories of the pioneer era. And I haven't read them, but they were recommended. They are called Good Clean, and there's like 9 or 10 authors in it, so they're short, And I loved it because it had the decal edge paper and kind of a parchment feel paper, and liked just having it because it just had such a nice cover. I haven't read them, but I got to thinking about it. It made me think, looking at this covered wagon, about how I had read Christians on the Oregon Trail, and I had read other things about Oregon since I have been transplanted in Oregon for some time. And sometimes whole families would come out with the grandmothers and an aged aunt, and all the children. Whole families would come out. They wouldn't even leave anybody back home, and then get settled. And every one of them died. Maybe one woman would be left, and they all died from something, or maybe on the trail lost all of them tragically, and there'd be one woman left. And I have read stories about how these people that got left without anyone made purpose in their life, and because they had something else in them. And we, of course, live for each other. We interact, and we are interdependent on one another emotionally, very strongly so. But we have to realize that we have other reasons to live, and to live for God. And what these people did when they got left, they still had to thrive and survive, and help others, and have a purpose in life. And so you need to be thinking about that even when you're very young. What are you going to do with your life, and how you can improve life at home, and all the potential there is in the home. And I understand that even Jane Austen wrote her books in her home. And so there always has to be other possibilities, and hopefully God will not God will protect you from any kind of tragedy. We know this, and but always have a few dreams and a goal, and in case the things that you depend on leave you. And so, in saying that, I don't have any really huge ideas about it, but I know that I have built up enough of a foundation that I probably could think of something. And that's why I think you need to keep your minds clear. You need to keep your body healthy, and keep yourself stable. And every day, remember to pray at the beginning. Sometimes we wake up and life just seems to be so swirling around us and so bewildered. And it doesn't matter. You can't really ever get away from it. You could live way out on a farm or a homestead and still have a lot of stress. So just from daily life. So as a homemaker, you still have the wonderful protection of the home, the wonderful protection of being left alone, we think. We hope. Being left alone to mind your own business. And the Bible talks about, minding our own business, and how important that is, because it's really great for our minds to mind our own business. I hope that I can have something more to show you next time, and I hope that this has helped you, and that you can leave a comment. And if you have time, I don't insist on it because I know that would take your mind off of your work. And so also I want to say one more time that Mrs. Virginia, who lives in Virginia, please email me so I can have your address, because I found a letter you wrote me at Christmas and a little gift you gave me, and I'd like to answer that. So I appreciate you coming and allowing me in your home. And so I say to you today, love your family and enjoy your home while you're listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.